He had everything a man could ever want: power, wealth, and a name that made people stand up straighter when they heard it. But despite his billions, Nathaniel Royce couldn't buy the one thing that mattered most to him: his mother's smile. Ever since the stroke that left her paralyzed and silent, the Royce mansion had been wrapped in cold silence. Dozens of nurses came and went, some too clinical, some too careless, but none could break through the wall of silence his mother had built around herself. Nathaniel had stopped hoping, until a soft knock on the door and a pair of tired brown eyes changed everything. Nathaniel Royce wasn't born into money, he was born into power. Old money. Royce Industries had been in his family for 3 generations, and by the time Nathaniel was 12, he could already recite the company's origin story better than the firm's lawyers. His father, Charles Royce, had raised him with a single mantra: we lead, we don't ask; we fix, we don't feel. And so Nathaniel grew up learning that emotions were distractions, that love was a liability, and that trust was a currency more fragile than gold. But the only exception to that rule had always been his mother. Eleanor Royce was everything his father wasn't: warm, nurturing, refined, but never weak. She had a quiet strength about her, the kind that didn't demand attention but commanded respect. While Charles taught Nathaniel how to dominate in boardrooms, Eleanor taught him how to read people, how to listen, how to stay humble even when the world put him on a pedestal. Nathaniel adored her in the way only sons of powerful women do, with silent reverence and a protectiveness that bordered on obsession. But all that changed the night she collapsed. It was supposed to be a simple dinner, just the two of them in the glass-ceiling conservatory, her favorite room in the mansion. They were talking about nothing in particular when, mid-sentence, Eleanor's words began to slur. Her fork dropped to the floor. Then her eyes glazed over, and she slid silently out of her chair. Nathaniel caught her before she hit the ground, but he couldn't catch the damage that had already been done. A stroke. Massive, debilitating. The doctor said she was lucky to survive, but Nathaniel didn't feel lucky, because what remained of his mother was only a shell. Her right side was paralyzed, her speech reduced to mumbles and occasional unintelligible sounds. She couldn't walk, couldn't feed herself, couldn't even smile. And worst of all, she wouldn't look him in the eyes anymore. For the first time in his life, Nathaniel felt helpless. The weeks that followed turned into months. He converted the west wing of the mansion into a state-of-the-art recovery center, hired the best physical therapists, neurologists, psychologists. He fired anyone who didn't show progress within 2 weeks. The mansion became a revolving door of professionals, and yet nothing changed. His mother grew quieter, more closed off. She began to shrink into herself, sometimes staring out the window for hours, not blinking, not moving. The woman who once ruled charity galas and hosted political figures now sat slumped in silence, unable to lift a spoon. Nathaniel's heart ached, but he didn't know how to show it. So he threw himself into work. Royce Industries surged under. His relentless leadership, profits doubled, global expansion soared. But the more his empire grew, the colder his home became. He stopped dating, stopped socializing. Every woman who tried to get close to him hit the same wall: emotional distance. Nathaniel didn't believe in love anymore. Not the romantic kind, and not even the kind that could save someone. Because if all his resources couldn't heal his own mother, what was the point? By the time Eleanor's second year in recovery came around, the staff had settled into quiet resignation. They did their jobs, fed her, cleaned her, turned her body every few hours. It was mechanical, soulless, and though Nathaniel never said it out loud, deep down, he had begun to give up too. He stopped hoping she would ever speak again, stopped waiting for her to squeeze his hand back, stopped expecting to see that twinkle in her eyes when he entered the room. He began to mourn her while she was still alive. And then, just as the last nurse gave her 2-week notice, a call came in from an agency he hadn't used before. The woman on the other end sounded tired, but confident. They had a new nurse, a different one. Not flashy, not famous, not with a glowing resume, but experienced in one thing no one else had. Mastered patience. Her name was Amara Fields. Nathaniel didn't care about her credentials anymore. He just needed someone to stay, someone who wouldn't leave after 2 weeks. So he said yes. He had no idea that the woman arriving on Monday morning would not only stay, but change everything. The morning Amara Fields arrived, the Royce estate was shrouded in a gray fog that clung to the gates like a warning. The mansion, perched like a quiet giant on the hillside, looked more like a monument than a home. Inside, everything was immaculate polished. Wood floors, marble counters, tall windows that never let in warmth. The staff moved in hushed tones, and Eleanor's wing was practically silent, save for the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator and the occasional metallic clink of feeding tools. Nathaniel didn't come down to greet Amara. He never did that anymore. Nurses were staff, like the housekeeper or the groundsman. And lately, they didn't last long enough to remember names. But Amara was different from the moment she stepped through the front door. She didn't look like the others. Her scrubs were plain, slightly faded, and she wore a knitted cardigan. Over them cream-colored and a little frayed at the cuffs. Her dark brown hair was tied back in a loose braid, and a few strands framed her tired, soft-featured face. There was no makeup, no perfume. Just a simple woman with steady eyes and a worn leather bag slung over her shoulder. Maria, the housekeeper, was the one to greet her. "Miss Fields?" she asked, skeptical. "Just Amara," the woman replied gently. "Please." She didn't ask for a tour, didn't question the equipment or the process. Instead, she went straight to the west wing and stood at the doorway of Eleanor's room for a full minute, just watching. Eleanor, as usual, was staring at the ceiling, expressionless. Her once lustrous silver hair now lay in thin strands across her cheeks. Her right hand rested limp on the blanket. Her eyes didn't move when Amara stepped in. But something Amara couldn't say what told her this woman hadn't disappeared completely. Not yet. Amara didn't introduce herself. Not with words. She simply walked to Eleanor's bedside, pulled up a chair, and sat. She took Eleanor's hand, not forcefully, but deliberately, and pressed her palm between her own. The room was quiet. No greetings, no questions. Just presence. Just warmth. Amara stayed there for nearly 2 hours. No one had ever done that before. When Maria asked if she needed anything, Amara only said, "Would you mind bringing me a small mirror?" "A mirror?" "Yes, one I can hold up to her. I want her to see herself. Sometimes it reminds people they're still here." Maria didn't understand, but she obeyed. Later that day, Nathaniel finally glanced at the staff reports. "New nurse arrived?" he asked, disinterested. "Yes, sir," Maria replied. "She's quiet. They all are at first." Maria hesitated, then added, "But she didn't ask for her schedule. Didn't ask about protocols. She just sat with your mother. Like she wasn't scared of her." Nathaniel looked up, the smallest flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "What's her name?" Amara Fields." He nodded but said nothing else. That night, Amara returned to Eleanor's bedside after dinner. She carried the mirror in one hand and in the other, a small speaker. She played soft music, classical, familiar pieces. Not loud, just enough to fill the silence. Then she whispered, "Do you remember this? Bach's Prelude in C major. It's beautiful. It reminds me of spring." She wasn't sure if Eleanor could understand her. No one knew, really. But Amara didn't speak to be heard. She spoke to connect, to acknowledge that there was still a woman behind those tired eyes. For the first week, nothing changed. Eleanor remained quiet, motionless. Amara followed the routine, feeding, cleaning, physical support. But she added things no one else did. She read aloud, brought fresh lavender into the room, brushed Eleanor's hair with long, gentle strokes, massaged her hands with warm oil, held her gaze even when it seemed pointless, and slowly, something shifted. On the 8th day, Eleanor blinked twice in response to a question. On the 10th, she turned her head toward the window when Amara described the garden outside. By the end of the 2nd week, Eleanor began humming, soft, broken notes but music, nonetheless. It was Maria who first noticed. "Sir, I think she's responding," she said nervously at Nathaniel's office door. Nathaniel looked up from his laptop. "Responding?" she hummed. "When the nurse was singing." He stared at her, skeptical. "She hasn't made a sound in over a year." "I know, sir, but this woman, she's doing something different." For the first time in months, Nathaniel walked to the west wing himself. He stopped at the door, just out of view, and watched. Amara was sitting beside Eleanor, as usual, a book open on her lap. She was reading poetry. Double quotes. And still she bloomed. "Even when no one noticed," she said, her voice like silk. Then very faintly, Eleanor's lips moved. No words, just a flutter, a murmur, but unmistakably alive. Nathaniel's heart seized. Didn't step in, didn't say anything, just stood there in the hallway, frozen, as tears welled in his eyes. He hadn't cried since his father died, not even when his mother lost her voice. But now, hearing that faint sound from behind the wall of silence, it broke him. He watched Amara lean forward and whisper, "I see you, Eleanor. You're still here." And in that moment, for reasons he couldn't understand, Nathaniel felt seeing two. The next day, Nathaniel did something he hadn't done in over 6 months. He sat in his mother's room. Not to check on her medical progress, not to lecture a nurse or fire a therapist. He just sat in silence, a quiet observer in the corner, watching Amara work with a kind of grace he couldn't comprehend. She wasn't in a rush. Every movement was deliberate. She dabbed Eleanor's lips with a warm cloth, hummed soft melodies while massaging her hands, and whispered stories about the garden, about the weather, about nothing and everything. Nathaniel expected her to notice him, maybe acknowledge his presence with a polite nod. But she didn't. Not out of disrespect, but because her entire focus was on Eleanor, and somehow, that made him feel even more invisible. He left after 20 minutes, not knowing what to make of the lump in his throat. That night, as he sat alone in the study, staring into a glass of untouched scotch, he found himself wondering, who was she? Not just what her name was, but what kind of person could walk into a place like this and bring life back into a dying room? He called Maria. "Do we have a file on Miss Fields?" he asked. "Not much, sir. Just what the agency sent. Single. No family listed. Been nursing for over 10 years. Most of it in long-term recovery care. References? 2. One from a hospice center in Ohio. One from a private home in Michigan. Both glowing." He hung up, unsettled. Why would someone so talented end up at the bottom of a file pile in a second-rate agency? The next morning, he was already in the room when Amara arrived. She blinked in surprise when she saw him sitting beside Eleanor, holding a book in his hand. "You're early," she said gently. "I wanted to see what all the fuss was about." She smiled faintly, but didn't reply. Instead, she walked to the bed and began her routine, as natural as breathing. Nathaniel watched her carefully, how she paid attention to the little things, how she adjusted the light so it wouldn't shine. In Eleanor's eyes, how she wiped her hands warm before touching Eleanor's skin. There was no showmanship, no pretense, just presence. "Why do you talk to her like she can hear you?" he asked quietly. Amara didn't look at him. "Because she can." "How do you know?" "Because she hums when I sing. Because she blinks when I ask questions. Because when I hold her hand, her fingers twitch. That's all communication. You just have to listen differently." Nathaniel studied her. "You think I haven't listened?" Amara turned to him then, her gaze steady but not accusatory. "I think you've been too hurt to try." It was the first time anyone had spoken to him like that. In years, honest, unafraid. It stunned him. He should have fired her for the tone. But he didn't. Instead, he looked at his mother, who, for the first time in nearly 2 years, was gazing back at him, not blankly, but softly. With a flicker of recognition in her eyes, he swallowed hard. She knows I'm here. Amara nodded. She's always known. Over the next few days, Nathaniel began showing up more often. At first, he stayed silent. Then he started reading aloud short poems, classic novels. Sometimes Amara would read too, and Eleanor would react more visibly when their voices overlapped. Then one afternoon, as Amara brushed Eleanor's hair, she began to tell a story about her childhood, about her mother. She used to say kindness isn't something you teach, she said softly. It's something you remember, like a scent or a song. It lingers. Nathaniel asked, "Is that why you became a nurse?" She hesitated. "No, I became a nurse because I watched someone I loved disappear. And I wanted to believe there was a way to keep part of them here, even if it was just through a touch." He didn't press her, but something in her voice made him wonder if her pain ran deeper than any file could reveal. That evening, Nathaniel sat beside his mother long after Amara had gone home. He took her hand gently and whispered, "You'd like her, Mom. She's got your kind of strength." And for the first time, Eleanor blinked once, slowly. As if to say, "I already do." Nathaniel let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. The ice was breaking. Not just around Eleanor, but inside him too. For the first time in years, Nathaniel Royce began to hope again. One morning, the air in the mansion shifted. Amara arrived as usual, her bag slung over her shoulder, a gentle hum on her lips. But as soon as she stepped into Eleanor's room, she felt it. A stillness that wasn't peace, but something heavier. Eleanor's breathing was different, shallow, slower, her lips pale, her skin slightly cool to the touch. Amara's smile faded. She set down her things, pulled out her stethoscope, and listened. Then she pressed the emergency button on the wall. Nathaniel was in a conference room with 3 board members when Maria burst through the door. "Sir, you need to come. It's your mother." The words hit him like a brick. He didn't ask for details. He didn't care who he was speaking to. He simply stood, left the room, and ran down the hall like a child. By the time he arrived, Eleanor had been placed on oxygen. A private physician had been called, and Amara was speaking softly into Eleanor's ear while rubbing her cold hands. "She's not dying," the doctor said firmly, "but she's declining. The nervous system sometimes has sudden dips. We can stabilize her, but we'll need to watch closely." Nathaniel stood motionless. For a man who had handled hostile takeovers, lawsuits, and international crises without blinking, now he couldn't even find his voice. His knees felt weak. He sat down beside his mother and lowered his head, and then he felt a hand on his shoulder. Amara, just standing there beside him, saying nothing. That simple gesture shattered something in him. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore," he whispered. "I built everything, and none of it can save her." Amara knelt beside him. "You don't need to save her, Nathaniel. You just need to be here." He turned to look at her, and for the first time, he saw not just a nurse, but a woman carrying her own pain, her own quiet strength. He didn't speak for a long time. Just sat there, holding his mother's hand in one and letting Amara hold the other. That night, Eleanor's condition remained fragile. The machines beeped more slowly. Her eyes fluttered, but didn't focus. The staff tried to stay calm, but it was Amara who kept the room from falling into fear. She moved with calm urgency, giving instructions gently but firmly, keeping Eleanor warm, wiping her lips, keeping music playing softly in the background. Nathaniel never left the room. At one point, near midnight, he whispered, "You've done more for her in 3 weeks than anyone has done in 2 years." Amara replied without turning from Eleanor's bedside, "I just listened. That's all she ever needed. The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds, painting golden streaks across the floor of the room. And for the first time in almost 2 years, Eleanor smiled. It was faint, weak, but unmistakable. A smile. Nathaniel saw it first. His breath caught in his throat, then Eleanor's fingers twitched. Slowly, painfully, but with purpose, her left hand rose and touched his wrist. She looked at him. Really looked. Tears spilled down his face. "Mom!" Her lips moved. The sound was barely a whisper, but it was there. "Hi, baby." Nathaniel broke. He sobbed, not like a man used to holding back emotions, but like a boy who had just been given his mother back from the dead. Amara stepped back quietly, her hands trembling slightly, her eyes misty. She didn't need to be in the spotlight. She just wanted Eleanor to feel human again. And that morning, Eleanor Royce not only smiled, but spoke again. Simple words, slow, soft, but real. The news spread through the house like wildfire. Maria cried in the kitchen. The doctor shook his head in disbelief, and Nathaniel, he didn't leave her side for the rest of the day. Later, while Eleanor slept peacefully, Nathaniel found Amara sitting quietly on a bench in the garden, sipping tea from a thermos. He sat beside her. They didn't speak for a while. The silence between them wasn't awkward, but full, real. Then he said, "I don't think I ever really knew what love was." Amara looked over. "And now?" He exhaled. "Now I know it's not found in boardrooms or headlines. It's found in moments like that, when you realize someone else gave life back to the one person you thought was already gone." She smiled softly. "Love is quiet. It doesn't demand attention. It just shows up." He turned to her, his eyes serious. "Thank you for showing up." They held each other's gaze, and something passed between them, unspoken, but understood. Wasn't just healing for Eleanor. It was healing for him. Eleanor's progress stunned everyone. Within 2 weeks of that first faint smile, she was speaking short phrases, lifting a spoon with help, and even chuckling when Amara told her soft, silly stories about a cat that used to sneak into her old apartment through a window. Nathaniel visited her every morning before work, now coffee in hand. Tie still loosened, his voice softer than the sharp bark his assistants were used to. He'd sit by her bed, read to her, or simply listen to her try out words again, her speech slow but determined. And Amara, she was more than just a nurse now. She had become part of the house, part of Eleanor's rhythm, part of Nathaniel's. He found himself waiting for the sound of her voice when she arrived each morning. He'd pause outside Eleanor's door just to hear her humming some lullaby or reading old poems. It made him feel things he didn't know how to name, things warm, steady, human. And slowly, the walls inside him began to fall. One afternoon, Eleanor said it aloud. Quietly but clearly, "You like her." Nathaniel blinked, taken off guard. "What?" Eleanor smiled. "Amara. You watch her like you used to watch butterflies when you were a boy. Afraid they'll fly away if you breathe too loudly." He chuckled softly. "Maybe." Eleanor reached for his hand. "Then don't breathe too loudly, but don't stay silent either." That night, Nathaniel invited Amara to dinner. Not a date, not quite. Just dinner in the conservatory, the same place where his mother had once collapsed. He lit candles. He asked Maria to prepare something light. He wore a sweater instead of a suit. Amara arrived wearing a simple, navy blue dress and no makeup, just like always. But to Nathaniel, she looked more radiant than anyone ever had. They talked about everything: books, music, Eleanor's recovery. They laughed. They were comfortable. But when the dessert plates were cleared and the lights dimmed, Amara grew quiet. He noticed the shift. "You okay?" he asked. She hesitated, then said, "I should have told you something." His heart slowed. "What is it?" She looked down at her hands, fingers clasped tightly together. "I wasn't supposed to take this job." The agency didn't want to place me here because I left my last home early. I broke contract. Why? She swallowed. Because the woman I was caring for, she died, and her son blamed me. Even though the doctors said it wasn't anyone's fault, he said I should have done more. Nathaniel listened carefully, not interrupting. It crushed me, she said. I loved her like my own mother. And when she passed, I couldn't even stay for the funeral. He made sure I left without a reference. He exhaled slowly. So that's why your file was so thin. She nodded. I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want to be judged by the worst moment of my life. Nathaniel reached across the table, took her hand. You're not defined by that moment, Amara, he said softly. You're defined by the way you brought my mother back to life, and by the way you taught me how to feel again. She looked at him, eyes wide and wet. He added, besides, I've had worse headlines. She laughed through her tears, and when he leaned in, he didn't ask permission because he didn't need to. She met him halfway, and for the first time in a very long time. It wasn't about pain or loss or guilt. It was just love, simple, quiet, real. The next morning felt different. It wasn't just the air or the sun filtering through the Royce estate's glass ceiling. It was Eleanor. She was sitting up straighter. Her hands were steadier. And when Nathaniel walked in with his usual coffee, she greeted him with a tired but bright, "Good morning, darling." It stopped him in his tracks. He hadn't heard her say darling in over 2 years. He blinked hard and sat at her bedside. "You're glowing," he said with a soft smile. "Don't sound so surprised," she replied with a twinkle in her. I'm not dead yet," Nathaniel chuckled. "Well, I certainly hope not. I was just getting used to having you back." Eleanor reached over and touched his hand. "Which is why I need to talk to you about something important." He straightened. "Anything?" She looked out the window for a long moment before she said it. "I want to leave this house." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "I want to go to the sea," she said. "Just for a few days. A cottage, fresh air, the sound of the waves. I want to remember what life feels like beyond machines and marble floors." Nathaniel hesitated. "Mom, we just stabilized your condition. What if something happens?" She looked at him gently. "Something already did happen. I came back to you, and now I want to live. If only for a moment, if only for a weekend, I want to feel something real again." He swallowed. "I don't want to risk losing you again. But I'm not asking to be reckless," she said. "I'm asking to be alive, even if just for a breath." Amara stood quietly at the doorway, having heard it all. She didn't speak, but her eyes met Nathaniel's with understanding. Later that evening, Nathaniel found Amara alone in the library, reading a book she'd pulled from the ancient Royce collection. "She really wants this," he said quietly. Amara looked up. "She needs this." He sat beside her. "Then let's make it happen." 3 days later, a private van rolled down the winding coastline, carrying Eleanor Royce, Amara Fields, Nathaniel, and more medical equipment than most hospitals. But Eleanor didn't mind. She wore a wide-brimmed hat and a soft scarf around her neck, looking more like an elegant retiree than a recovering stroke patient. They arrived at a secluded white cottage by the sea, small, charming, with a porch that faced the waves. Nathaniel had bought it overnight, quietly, anonymously, because when his mother asked for something now, he made it happen. The first morning there, Eleanor cried when she smelled the salt in the air. Amara wheeled her to the porch, and Nathaniel joined them, sitting on the steps in rolled-up sleeves and bare feet. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Eleanor closed her eyes and whispered, "This is what peace feels like." The weekend passed like a dream. Amara cooked simple meals with herbs from the cottage's garden. Nathaniel built a fire each night and read aloud to both women. And Eleanor, with renewed energy, asked questions about Amara's life, about Nathaniel's childhood memories, about what they would do if they weren't so busy being who they had to be. It was during one of these nights that Eleanor said something unexpected. You know, she said slowly, I always thought Nathaniel would end up with a woman who wore diamonds and heels. Someone fierce like his father expected. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. That sounds like a compliment wrapped in judgment. She laughed, but now I know he needed someone soft. Someone with strength that doesn't scream. Someone who understands pain. Because she survived it. Amara looked away, shy. But Nathaniel took her hand openly. She's everything I didn't know I needed, he said. Eleanor smiled. Then don't let her go. On the last night at the cottage, Eleanor stayed up late watching the stars. Amara brought her a blanket and sat beside her. They didn't speak for a long time. Then Eleanor turned and said, You know, Amara, my son was a man before I was ready to stop mothering him. I held too tightly. I think I did it again when I fell silent. I trapped him in a kind of grief. He couldn't escape. Amara listened quietly. But you, Eleanor continued, you opened the windows again. You brought light into a house that had forgotten the sun. And I don't say this lightly, but I would be proud to call you family. Amara's lips trembled. Thank you. That means more than I can say. Eleanor reached over and squeezed her hand. Then don't say it. Just stay. The next morning, Nathaniel stood with Amara at the edge of the water. He turned to her and said, I've spent my whole life building walls. Around my heart. Around my past. Around my mother. She nodded, watching the waves. But you, he said, you walk through them like they're made of silk. Amara's eyes filled with tears. Nathaniel took a deep breath. So I have one question. She looked at him, heart thudding. Will you stay? Not as a nurse, not as an employee, but as someone who makes everything make sense again. Amara blinked back emotion. Yes. And just like that, two broken people who had only ever known how to serve others finally let someone love them back. They returned to the Royce estate on a crisp Monday morning. The trees were just beginning to shift into autumn's gold, and for the first time in years, the mansion didn't feel cold. It felt like home. Eleanor was stronger. Not cured, not entirely independent, but alive in a way she hadn't been since before her stroke. Her laughter returned, softer now, and more rare, but it had weight and joy. The staff smiled more. The halls echoed with warmth. Nathaniel was no longer the man people whispered about with fear. He was still powerful, still sharp, but there was a softness to his eyes now. A man who had remembered what it meant to love without conditions. And Amara, she bloomed. She moved through the house like sunlight. No longer just a nurse, now a partner, a daughter figure, a woman rediscovering her worth. She didn't need to wear diamonds or designer heels. She wore grace, quiet grace. The kind that changed everything without asking for credit. 1 week after returning home, as Eleanor rested in the sunroom, Nathaniel found Amara in the garden, trimming herbs. Do you ever miss your old life? He asked. She turned, the wind teasing a loose strand of hair. I think I was waiting for this one all along. He smiled and reached into his pocket. Slowly. I was going to wait. He said, maybe for a month, maybe for a year, but I've never been good at waiting when I already know the answer. She tilted her head. Nathaniel. He took her hand, placed a small velvet box in it. I don't want perfection. I just want presence, you here with me. Through the good, the broken, the quiet. She opened the box. Inside, no giant diamond. No flashy gold dot, just a delicate silver band with a small sapphire in the center. Simple, timeless, like her. Amara whispered, yes, through a smile that trembled. The Royce estate was alive with color. Spring had returned, and so had celebration. Not grand, not loud, but beautiful. In the garden, under a trellis of white roses, Nathaniel and Amara exchanged vows before a small group. Eleanor in her wheelchair, beaming proudly. Maria crying into a tissue. Even the agency director who once doubted Amara, sitting silently in the back row with damp eyes. I used to think love was something earned, Nathaniel said in his vows. But now I know it's something noticed, something given, something quiet. And Amara, voice shaking, replied, I thought I was meant to be invisible, until someone really looked at me. And didn't look away. They kissed. The wind rustled the trees. Eleanor clapped. A bird flew overhead, and everything, just for that moment, was right. Later that year, Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep. Her last words, spoken to Amara as she brushed her hair, were, You gave me back my son. Thank you. She was buried in a private garden on the estate, beside her late husband, beneath a flowering cherry tree. On her tombstone were the words, Loved, remembered, restored. Amara and Nathaniel still live in the Royce home. But it's not quiet anymore. It's full of life. Laughter. And soon, if the tiny blue socks Amara knitted are any clue, it will echo with the sound of a child. Because healing doesn't end with one person. It continues through every life they touch.